It was supposed to be just another rainy night in London. But when 5 men in dark coats entered the Oriat Finch, the most secretive dining room in Mayfair, something shifted in the air. They sealed every exit in silence. Their target, Elias Kade, the solitary king of Canary Wharf, the man whose data vaults could tilt the markets of nations. They thought no one else mattered. They did not notice the waitress polishing glasses in the corner. They did not notice the red thread at her wrist, drawn tight as if it had felt the storm before anyone else. 12 minutes later, the balance of power in the city would no longer belong to them. The rain had been falling since dusk, a fine silver veil that blurred the street lamps of Mayfair into molten coins. Black cars lined the curb outside the Oriat Finch, a restaurant that did not appear on maps, its entrance marked only by a brass finch, wings half spread, set into a mahogany door. Those who came here did not need signs. Power had its own directions, whispered from driver to driver, broker to broker. Inside, the world was a different weather. Golden sconces cast light against cherrywood walls. Conversations murmured like chess moves hidden under silk. Crystal glasses sang faintly each time they touched. And in that crystalline sound, fortunes shifted. The Oriat Finch was not a restaurant. It was a sanctum, a stage for those who measured their lives in dividends and secrets. Mina Arlow moved through it unseen. She wore the uniform, black dress, white apron, crisp as paper, but her true uniform was invisibility. Plates slid from her hands with clockwork precision. Her footsteps made no more sound than the rain on the roof. To most patrons, she was not even a person, only part of the furniture, as unnoticed as the golden finch embossed on every napkin. Yet Mina noticed everything. The tremor in a senator's hand as he lifted a fork. The way two hedge fund rivals spoke in alternating tones, never overlapping. The fact that Elias Kade, seated behind frosted glass at his favorite booth, always poured his Lagavulin 25 the same way. 2 fingers, no water, one slow turn of the glass before the first sip. And tonight, she noticed something else. The rhythm of the room was wrong. It began as a silence too sudden, too heavy. A fork paused midair, a candle's flame guttered when no wind touched it. Then, faintly, the clock above the bar ticked out of time, as if the air itself had shifted one beat away from the world. Mina's hand drifted, almost unconsciously, to the bracelet at her wrist. A single thread of red, frayed at the edges, its knot clumsy, tied by the fingers of a boy who no longer lived. Jonah, her older brother. The thread was all that remained of him after Hackney's concrete, and hunger took what it wanted. She wore it as reminder, as tether. And tonight, as it pulled taut, she felt the echo of his voice. Something's coming. The door opened. They entered not as diners, but as predators. 5 men, rain streaming from their coats, faces cast in the hard light of the street lamps behind them. Their formation was precise. 2 split toward the main entrance, standing as if bored patrons. Another 2 drifted near the bar and the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. The last, a tall figure in a soaked wool cloak, moved with the authority of gravity itself. Silas Voss. His name would never appear in newspapers, but men in certain circles whispered it like a warning. Their eyes did not search for tables, menus, or waiters. They were already measuring sight lines, counting bodies, sketching exits in their minds. And when their gaze stopped, it stopped at one booth only, behind the frosted partition where Elias Kade sat alone, swirling amber in crystal. Kade, the man whose algorithms stitched together the arteries of global finance. To some, a savior. To others, a tyrant. To all, a vault of information so dense it could collapse or rescue economies. He sat with the stillness of someone who knew both the weight of data and the fragility of glass. His eyes lingered not on his drink, but on the empty seat opposite him. once filled by a woman with laughter like broken bells. Gone now. He returned to this booth once a month, as though her ghost might order a glass of her own. The intruders thought they had the room. They thought the waitress was invisible. Mina lowered her gaze, cloth moving across crystal, but her spine had straightened. The rain outside became a drumbeat. The red thread at her wrist thrummed like a second pulse. She marked every step, every angle, every blind spot. The kitchen staff laughed faintly behind swinging doors, oblivious. The wealthy men at their tables continued to murmur about commodities and scandal, oblivious. Even Elias, watching the rain slide down the frosted partition, seemed oblivious. But Mina knew. The room was about to fracture. Her brother had once told her, on the fire escape of their Hackney flat, that life had two kinds of people, those who acted when the moment came, and those who froze. "You won't know which you are until the rain starts," he had said. The rain had started. She placed the glass down on the bar. The faint click echoed far louder than it should have. Heads turned. For a breathless moment, the air inside the Oriat Finch felt like the air before lightning, charged, expectant, inevitable. And in that fragile silence, Mina Arlow ceased to be invisible. The red thread tightened at her wrist. The storm had finally found its witness. London had built kingdoms out of glass. Canary Wharf rose above the Thames like a crown of steel and mirrors, each tower a blade catching the clouds. From those towers, Elias Kade ruled, not with armies, but with algorithms. His signature could stall stock exchanges, ripple currencies, fracture or fuse entire markets. To those who feared him, he was less a man than a mechanism, a vault of cold equations wrapped in flesh. But to Elias, he was something smaller, something lonelier. That night, as rain painted Mayfair in silver, he sat alone in the frosted booth of the Oriat Finch. He wore a charcoal suit, pressed with precision, yet his posture betrayed none of its sharpness. He leaned slightly inward, as though gravity bent him toward the memory sitting across the table. He always ordered the same, Lagavulin 25, neat. The ritual mattered. He would pour 2 fingers, swirl once. Let the liquid touch his lip only after a pause that lasted exactly 3 breaths. Then his eyes, blue, pale, unblinking, would rest on the chair opposite him. A chair once occupied by a woman with dark hair and laughter that echoed like glass breaking. Her absence filled the booth like a second occupant. The staff never asked. They had been told only once, years ago, by an assistant who could not bear to see the pattern without explanation. Elias's wife, Isabel, had died in an accident the city had whispered about but never confirmed. A car overturned near Blackfriars, a file sealed, an investigation muted by the gravity of his name. To the world, it was a footnote. To Elias, it was an endless booth, a silent toast across frosted glass. Mina, polishing glasses at the bar, had observed the ritual from a distance month after month. She noticed the details others missed, the way his hand tightened imperceptibly when the second glass was not poured, how his lips formed a question but never spoke it, how his gaze froze for a heartbeat whenever laughter from another table broke too brightly. She wondered if he came to remember her or to keep forgetting. On this night, though, there was a difference. The rhythm was uneven. The silence that followed the pour was too taut, too electric. Elias swirled his Lagavulin, but the motion was restless, as if he could feel the shift in the air long before the 5 men arrived. His empire had taught him to sense invisible storms, market crashes, hostile takeovers, regulatory strikes. And now, without quite knowing why, he suspected the danger was not in his towers, but here, in this sanctuary of wood and glass. He lifted his glass. The smoke of peat and sea salt curled up like memory. He drank slowly, his mind elsewhere, on data servers cooled by Icelandic winds, on a cryptographic vault buried 3 stories beneath Canary Wharf, on a shard of information so volatile that even he hesitated to name it aloud. Aegis Shard. The phrase flickered like static in his brain. He had spent 2 years building it, a fail-safe embedded in the architecture of global finance, a silent lever that could redistribute weight in times of fracture. To some, it was a weapon. To others, salvation. To Elias, it was the only way he knew to hold chaos at bay. But tonight, in Mayfair, the storm had followed him. Through the frosted glass of his booth, he caught the reflection of rain-dark figures stepping inside. Too deliberate, too synchronized. He set the glass down, its click against wood echoing like a gunshot in his ears. For a moment his breath stilled. He thought of Isabel, of the promise he had whispered at her hospital bed. I will keep the world steady, no matter what it takes. And then he saw her, Mina Arlow. He had not noticed her before, not really. A waitress among 1,000 invisible servers across London. But something in her movement caught his eye now. Not her beauty, though she had a quiet strength to her features, but the precision, the way her hand set a glass down as if it were a trigger. The way her body shifted ever so slightly into balance, like a dancer about to leap. For the first time in years, Elias Kade felt something break through the static of grief and calculation. He felt recognition, not of her face, but of her stance. A readiness that did not belong to waitstaff. The storm was already inside the room. The solitary king of Canary Wharf reached for his glass again, though the whiskey had turned bitter in his mouth. Outside, the rain thickened into sheets. Inside, time began to slow. 5 men adjusted their coats. Mina's red thread pulled taut at her wrist. And in that suspended heartbeat, Elias. Kade knew his private ritual, his sanctuary, was over. The world was about to reorder itself, not in the towers of Canary Wharf, but here, in the amber light of the Aureate Finch. The Aureate Finch was never meant to feel claustrophobic. Its ceilings arched high, wood polished to cathedral gleam, chandeliers spilling amber light like liquid honey. But when the door opened a second time, and then a third, the air grew smaller, denser. The storm had arrived, not in rain, but in men. 5 of them. They came as a sequence, not a crowd. The first 2 crossed the threshold with the casual weight of men who had entered countless rooms they intended to own. Their eyes did not linger on menus or wine racks. They mapped angles. One positioned himself near the entrance, his coat still dripping from the storm, hands loose at his sides but ready to harden. The other drifted toward the hallway that led to the washrooms, his posture deceptively idle, his gaze like the lens of a camera fixing exits into memory. 2 more followed, carrying themselves as if they belonged to no trade except enforcement. Their shoulders were stone under rain-soaked wool. They moved toward the bar and the door to the kitchen, occupying space with the precision of walls erected overnight. Patrons shifted uncomfortably, not yet understanding why their throats had tightened. The staff glanced once, then quickly away, instinctively erasing themselves from notice. And then the 5th entered. Silas Voss. He shed the storm from his cloak with one deliberate movement, droplets scattering across the tiles like coins dropped in offering. His presence was not loud. It was gravitational. The chatter of the room dimmed, not because he commanded silence, but because silence traveled with him. Tall, broad-shouldered, features carved into permanence by old battles, he moved with the inevitability of tidewater. His eyes, pale and cruel as sea glass, swept the room once before fixing on the frosted booth at the back. Elias Kade. The king of Canary Wharf had no guards here, no entourage. He sat alone, his whiskey unfinished, the reflection of Silas's form stretching across the glass like a dark omen. The seal was complete. It was a maneuver older than the city itself, though perfected in the underworld of modern London. 5 men, 5 points, sealing the arteries of a room until it was less a restaurant than a trap. The exits covered, the witnesses contained. A play executed so cleanly that even the chandeliers seemed to dim in obedience. Mina Arlow felt it the way a musician feels a false note. The hum in the air changed pitch. Patrons went on eating, but their movements were tighter now, forks trembling slightly in hands, eyes darting in quick, guilty glances. Some had recognized the name that slipped unspoken through the current. Elias Kade. Mina's pulse stuttered. She had overheard that phrase once before. A whispered fragment, exchanged at the edge of a banker's table weeks ago, smuggled into her mind by accident. She had carried it without meaning to, the way one carries a match unlit but dangerous in the pocket. Now the spark was here. Silas moved toward Elias's booth. His men adjusted subtly, creating corridors of control. One leaned against the bar, brushing droplets from his sleeve. Another fingered the brass handle of the kitchen door as though idly, while in truth, pinning it shut. To the untrained eye, nothing had happened. To Mina, everything had. Her hand brushed the red thread at her wrist. Jonah had always said, "The world doesn't announce its fractures. You feel them first, in the silence." The silence was here. Elias raised his eyes at last, as if acknowledging destiny. He did not flinch, did not call for help. The king of Canary Wharf was a man who had learned long ago that storms did not stop by shouting at them. He watched the figure of Silas approach, and in his gaze there was not fear, but recognition. The Elias Kade was no longer a secret. Mina's breath slowed. She placed another glass on the bar, the faint click ringing louder in her chest than thunder. She counted distances, 12 steps from bar to booth, 6 between her and the enforcer by the kitchen, 3 bottles within arm's reach that could shatter on bone. She felt the weight of the room shift onto her shoulders, though no one else yet knew she existed. The seal of the room had been drawn. But seals, Mina knew, could be broken. And tonight, if the thread at her wrist was right, it would be her hands that tore it apart. The click was nothing, a kiss of crystal on wood. Yet it traveled through the Ariat Finch like a hairline crack through tempered glass. Mina set the flute down with surgical care, as if aligning a scope, as if measuring wind. The bar mirror threw back a rain-dimmed city and the pale ovals of faces that did not yet know they were already witnesses. In that thin slice of silence after the click, she breathed once, slow, deep, anchoring the world to her ribs. The red thread at her wrist tugged, a small pulse against skin, the ghost of Jonah's hand tightening around her own. Move. She pivoted, not a turn so much as a confession. Shoulders uncurled, weight settled over the balls of her feet. The waitress dissolved. The other self stood up inside her, the one that remembered rooftops and narrow stairwells, the one that had learned balance from hunger and geometry from running. Her eyes tracked 3 lines at once. The enforcer at the kitchen door, bored fingers grazing the brass handle. The second enforcer at the bar, posture loose but hips squared. And the distance to Elias Kade, 12 paces through honeyed light and expensive fear. "Miss," a banker murmured, lifting a hand toward his empty wine. Mina didn't look at him. She had already mapped every bottle within reach, ranked by weight, traction, shatter profile. Her right hand closed around the base of a chilled bottle of sparkling wine, brut, green glass, good mass. In the mirror, the kitchen enforcer's gaze drifted toward her and away again, filing her under furniture. The mistake that breaks a room is always small. She let her wrist roll. The bottle became a pendulum. The first strike was a whisper, glass kissing tendon. A quick, short arc that clipped the enforcer's radial nerve exactly where it surfaced at the wrist. His fingers opened without his permission. His hand slapped the brass handle in reflex, not control. Before the bottle completed its swing, Mina stepped in and let its momentum carry through to the bar enforcer's collarbone. The thock was intimate. His breath left him in a startled oath. His knees remembered gravity. The banker's hand froze midair. A spoon chimed against porcelain somewhere near the far wall, and then was very still. "Hey!" the kitchen enforcer barked, shock burning off boredom. His jacket twitched, reaching for a holster he thought would obey. Mina's left hand found a bar towel. Her right snapped, turning the bottle's neck into a lever. She drove the lip down onto the knuckles of his drawing hand, quick, precise, not breaking bone, only turning intention to pain. His pistol snagged where fabric bunched. She stepped into his shadow and gave the bottle backhand to the mastoid, a gentle correction with brutal results. Lights went out behind his eyes. He folded into the door like a marionette whose strings had been cut. That was second 20. The red thread brushed the inside of her wrist as she vaulted the bar. It wasn't a vault so much as a long step taken in the air. The countertop caught her thighs. The world tilted and reset. She landed in the narrow corridor between bar and banquette, a sliver of floor the architects had never meant for running. The remaining enforcer at the bar found his breath and tried to shape it into a shout. Mina took the shout away with a heel to his diaphragm, not a Hollywood kick, just a surgeon's note played loudly. Air left him like a secret. He leaned forward because he had to. She guided him the rest of the way with a palm to the back of his head and the soft embrace of polished wood. Someone finally screamed. Silas Voss turned. He had been speaking to Elias, or rather, allowing his silence to be heard by Elias. Now the music changed. His chin rose by a single imperceptible degree, as if scenting the weather's betrayal. He didn't bark an order. The good ones don't. He shifted his weight, and the two scouts at the front of the room obeyed the geometry of that weight. One put a hand to his ear. The other's coat bloomed open like a dark flower. Mina ran. Not fast. Smooth, the way water finds its gradient. Tables blurred on either side, faces resolving into head-tilted portraits of wealth interrupted. She slid a palm along the back of a chair and let it spin into the scout stepping left. Wood met shin and the shin surrendered. A hand rose with a knife. Short, practical. Mina didn't stop to disagree. She slid under his arm as it descended, her shoulder grazing his ribs. The knife found only air, and then air found his throat as she clasped wrist to forearm, stepped past, and levered the joint the wrong way. The sound it made was a pop no violin would claim. The knife fell obediently toward the floor. Mina's shoe intercepted, catching the blade under the arch. A small hop, a larger question. And the knife stood up on its tip for the half-second she needed to snatch its handle cleanly with her offhand. Second 40. The chandeliers held their breath. Rain wrote its long cursive against the windows. Somewhere behind her, silverware trembled. The second scout drew something uglier, a stubby silhouette wrapped in stormcoat fabric. Mina didn't risk the argument. She tore a linen napkin off a table with her left hand and flung it into his face, not to blind him, cloth never truly blinds, but to make his reflexes wince. Reflexes hate soft things. As the napkin rose, the champagne bottle in her right hand completed a final, loyal service. She sabered the neck, not with the knife, but with the butt of the bottle, a swift upward strike against the rim that set the glass to its beautiful failure. The top sheared clean with a bell's sigh. Jagged crystal glittered in her hand. Cold bubbles bled along its teeth. "Stop!" someone shouted, as if verbs were fences. The scout fired. The room flinched as one, but he had shot at where she had been taught to be, not where she was. Mina was already inside his elbows, the napkin collapsing across his eyes, the jagged flute riding up under his wrist, redirecting the barrel toward the ceiling. A chandelier lost a tear. Light shattered into a brief meteor shower. People finally understood danger the way humans always do, by listening to the glass break. Silas's head tilted that single degree again. Acceptance. Recalculation. Elias Kade rose behind the frosted glass, not abruptly, not bravely, simply inevitably. The outline of his shoulders squared, the geometry of the booth surrendering its right to hold him. Through the frost he saw motion more than men, a thread of red, a blade of light, the contour of a fall. He did not call out. He did not ruin the shape of what was happening with a name. Mina shoved the scout into a booth and let him discover upholstery with his spine. She laced the broken flute behind his wrist, twisted, and left the weapon taken from him in the direction of his own regret. There was no time to secure anything. Control would have to be a moving object. Second 65. A hiss began, thin at first, then thick as winter fog. Mina had found the CO2 test toggle while her hands were still someone else's hands, during the long months of refitting after a kitchen fire. She had argued for a safer layout. No one had listened. The toggle lived under the bar's lower lip, a secret for inspections. She had memorized its shape with her knuckles. Now her earlier inventory paid out. The nozzles above the bar exhaled cold breath. White washed over amber. Vision shortened. Edges softened. The world became a charcoal sketch. She pulled two line cooks by their jackets, thrust them toward the back corridor. "Go!" she barked, voice low, clipped, issuing not orders, but exits. One stared at her with the shock of a person seeing a co-worker's second face. The other obeyed the grammar of smoke and ran. A movement to her right. The bar enforcer, stubborn, newly oxygened, swung a heavy right that would have earned him applause in cheaper rooms. Mina let it pass, felt the wind of it touch her cheek like the hand of a dead season, and answered with the shortest, ugliest left-hand hook she owned. Not to the jaw, to the ear. Balance is a house with many doors. The ear opens all of them. He sat down without knowing he had chosen the chair. Silas came then, not rushing. He split the war in the room the way a prow splits water, cleanly, impatient with turbulence. He did not bother with the bar's low gate. He stepped over it in a way that made the gate feel ashamed of its height. Up close, he smelled of wool and rain and the iron memory of old fights. His eyes met Mina's not as hunter to prey, but as climbers measuring a slope. "You're not staff," he said, not exactly surprised. Mina's breath smoothed, the red thread warm now, a brand of belonging. "You sealed the room," she said. "You forgot the pressure release." He smiled with half a mouth. "We brought our own." He stepped in. She closed the last inch. There is a kind of fight that is about domination, and a kind that is about subtraction. Mina chose subtraction. She took his options away one joint at a time, dismantling the machine he had made of his body. When his hand rose, she did not strike it. She rotated it, thumb to thumb, catching his wrist in a small orbit that aligned his elbow against its nature. When his weight came forward, she wasn't there. She was beside the weight, teaching it to fall elsewhere. He was stronger. Strength is a boat. She was water. They moved inside the hiss and the rain, inside the chandelier's wounded light. Her heel kissed his ankle bone. His stance faltered. She counted the seconds between his breath and his shoulder, and when those intervals met, she snapped her forearm across the hinge of his elbow and leaned. The sound was a dry knot loosening. Not catastrophic, not yet, but instructive. He grunted, the sound of a man filing a fact. Second 90. The room had compressed to the size of a single decision. Elias stood 5 paces away now, a shape cut from frost and will. People crouched beneath tables that were never meant for shelter. A woman near the front clutched a clutch like a talisman. A maitre d' whispered prayers to a god of gratuity who did not manage rooms like this. "Enough," Silas said, not to Mina, but to the air, as if striking a bargain with physics. He shifted his weight in a way that conceded nothing and admitted something. "We don't need the spectacle." Mina heard Jonah then, not as memory but as instruction. Leave a door open. She eased the pressure a fraction, not mercy, strategy. The CO2 cloud eddied. Somewhere a siren's echo threaded the rain, far yet, but real. Her eyes flicked to Elias. He did not nod. Kings rarely do. But the set of his jaw moved the arithmetic. He was no longer a passenger. Mina released Silas's arm before the joint burned past usefulness. She stepped back into balance, blade low, thread bright. "Walk away from the civilians," she said softly, "or we finish it here." Silas looked at the broken chandelier, at the sleeping enforcers, at the patrons who would swear they had seen nothing and remember everything. He made a choice that read as patience and plotted as postponement. His left hand opened, empty. Truce shaped itself in the mist. "Noted," he said. "But the city is larger than this room." "The city," Mina answered, "just learned you bleed." The hiss thinned. The rain outside thickened. Somewhere, glass cracked as cooling met heat. The clock above the bar remembered the beat it had lost and resumed its duty. Mina lowered the broken flute. She felt the tremor in her own fingers only now, felt the aftershock of movement ripple through muscle. The red thread lay quiet, the knot small and stubborn. She could almost feel Jonah smile the way he had on the fire escape, when he'd taught her that some exits are entries wearing different coats. And across the frosted glass, Elias Kade, solitary king, maker of mechanisms, finally saw her as the variable every model fears and every miracle needs. The room did not applaud. It exhaled. The waitress was gone. The agent had arrived. The Orient Finch had not been built for war. Its heart was the kitchen, copper pans hanging like medals, steam rising from stockpots, knives gleaming in magnetic racks. It was the unseen engine of elegance, meant only to turn raw into refined, chaos into courses. Yet tonight, as Mina burst through the swinging doors with 2 terrified line cooks clutched by their sleeves, the kitchen became a theater of survival. "Out!" she barked, her voice steady, sculpted by urgency. She thrust them toward the back corridor where an unmarked service door led to the alley. One of them hesitated, loyalty or shock, but Mina shoved him with a force that brooked no argument. Survival was now measured not in minutes, but in exits. Behind her, the enforcer who had regained his feet crashed through the door with a curse. His boot slipped on the slick tile. A tray clattered from the counter to the floor, scattering porcelain like white teeth. Mina was already moving. She seized the nearest skillet, cast iron, heavy, seasoned black by years of flame, and spun. The blow landed across the joint of his shoulder and neck, a flat arc of steel meeting flesh and bone. He grunted, staggered, dropped his pistol. She did not pause. The skillet came around again, lower this time, cracking against his wrist with a sound like green wood splitting. His fingers spasmed. The gun clattered into the sink, where it hissed under a jet of steaming water. The enforcer reeled back. Steam clouded his glasses, sweat or condensation dripping down his cheek. Mina drove her knee into his abdomen, then shoved him sideways into the rack of hanging pans. The crash was deafening, a metallic chorus that echoed out into the dining room. Diners shrieked, certain the roof was collapsing. Another man barreled in, a second enforcer, broader, angrier, blood shining at his temple where she had struck him earlier. He carried nothing in his hands. His body itself was the weapon. Mina darted for the champagne station. A row of bottles gleamed on crushed ice, their necks crowned with foil. She snatched the saber, ceremonial, sharp, used by sommeliers to theatrically lop corks in half. Tonight it was no ceremony. She stripped the sheath away with her thumb, blade flashing cold under fluorescent light. He lunged. She slashed, not deep, not lethal, but precise, slicing across his forearm as he raised it. The blade cut fabric and skin. He howled, momentum breaking. She pivoted, planting one foot on the slippery tile, and pressed the edge against the tendon at his wrist. His grip opened involuntarily, the human body conceding to physics. He swung with his other arm. Mina ducked, rolled across the wet floor, and came up with the saber reversed, blade down. Her breath ragged but controlled. The kitchen's steam cloaked her like an ally. She moved through it, a shadow among shadows, the red thread on her wrist burning against her skin. The first enforcer recovered, reaching blindly for her. She slashed the saber across the hanging fire suppression cord. White vapor erupted from the ceiling, hissing down like Arctic fog. The men coughed, eyes watering, vision smothered. Mina thrived. A quick step, a twist of her wrist, and the saber struck the first enforcer's calf. He dropped to a knee. She planted her boot against his chest and shoved, sending him sprawling backward into a rack of plates. Porcelain shattered like gunfire. The second came again, fury outweighing pain. Mina sidestepped, letting him charge past into the fog. His bulk slammed into the counter, utensils scattered. She swept the saber in a low arc, clipping behind his knee. The joint buckled. He toppled, cursing, arms flailing. Mina pressed the blade's edge against the vulnerable hollow of his throat. "Stay," she whispered. For a heartbeat, even rage understood obedience. The door burst open once more, Silas's voice behind it, sharp, cutting through the hiss of gas and steel. "Enough!" The enforcers froze. Mina did not lower the saber. Her chest heaved, lungs raw with steam. She could hear diners screaming beyond the kitchen door, the clink of cutlery abandoned mid-course, the shrill ring of someone's phone left off its hook. Silas stepped into the haze, his cloak wet with rain, his gaze ice. He surveyed the wreckage, broken porcelain, steam curling around copper pans, two of his men bleeding at Mina's feet. And then his eyes met hers, dark against pale fog, the saber glinting like a shard of lightning. "You improvise well," he said, voice low, almost admiring. Mina's grip tightened. "I survive better." Silas tilted his head, the faintest acknowledgement of her resolve. Then he lifted his hand, not to strike, but to call back his wounded. "We'll finish elsewhere." The enforcers obeyed, dragging themselves upright, battered, gasping. Silas did not look away from her until the last of them had limped through the steam. Only then did he turn, cloak sweeping like the shadow of a closing door. Silence lingered after they left, heavy as lead. The kitchen exhaled smoke and fear. Mina lowered the saber, her arms trembling, the red thread loose against her wrist. She leaned against the counter for a breath, hearing the distant beat of rain against Mayfair windows. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight. Not victory, not yet, but the fragile pause between storms. She knew Silas would return. She knew Elias Kade, watching through the frost beyond the kitchen, had seen her step from invisibility into defiance. And she knew this was no longer about a restaurant, or even survival. It was about the Aegis shard, and about the cost of carrying power you never asked for. Glass remembers everything. every chandelier in the Oriat Finch, every wine glass trembling on its stem, every mirror burnished to catch a patron's vanity. It all kept fragments of the storm, and Mina Arlow, child of Hackney stairwells and ghost sister of Jonah's warnings, understood that light itself could be forced to lie. The enforcers regrouped in the dining room. Steam still hissed faintly from the kitchen vents, coiling with candle smoke, painting the air in wavering veils. Patrons cowered in booths, their whispers sharp as broken cutlery. Silas Voss had not withdrawn. He was patient, circling in the fog, pale eyes gauging her not as nuisance but as rival piece in his geometry. Mina slid along the booths, breath steady, fingers brushing polished wood. In her left hand, she carried a silver serving tray, once meant to deliver champagne. Now it was a lure. Its surface was warped with age, a mirror that bent light just enough to trick the impatient. She waited until Silas's scout, the wiry one with the cracked rib, raised his weapon toward the shimmer of her movement. At the perfect instant, she angled the tray. Candlelight leapt, her silhouette dancing across the frosted window like a ghost escaping. The scout fired. Glass shattered. A sheet of Mayfair rain tore into the room, cold and brutal, extinguishing candles in one hiss. Patrons shrieked, ducking under linen and mahogany. Mina was nowhere near the impact. She had already slid low, slipping into the blind corner between banquettes, the tray discarded like a spent cartridge. Silas snarled, not loud, but with the authority of a man who hated mistakes. He turned toward the broken pane, cloak whipping in the draft. The storm outside became an accomplice, its wind funneling in, turning tablecloths into sails. Mina moved in that chaos. She rose from the crouch and struck, quick as the knife edge of memory. The scout who had fired too soon didn't even register her approach until the butt of her borrowed pistol cracked under his jaw. His eyes rolled white. He collapsed into the booth, unconscious before his head hit the leather. The second scout lunged. He was younger, angrier, and less certain. His knife flashed, catching the stormlight. Mina didn't retreat. She stepped into him, deflecting the blade with the flat of her forearm, letting it scrape skin but miss artery. She slammed her shoulder into his sternum, unbalancing him. With one hand, she seized his wrist. With the other, she hammered the edge of a crystal dessert dish against his temple. Fragile glass met fragile bone. He dropped, clutching blood. The dining room gasped as if it too had been struck. Now only Silas remained. He stood between her and Elias's booth, rain soaking his cloak, shards of glass crunching under his boots. He studied her as one studies an unexpected adversary on a board, respect tinged with irritation. His men had been undone not by strength, but by the simplest of lies, reflections, misdirection, rhythm. "You fight like someone taught by ghosts," he said. Mina steadied her breath, the red thread pulsing warm at her wrist. "Ghosts teach better than masters. They have nothing left to lose." Silas's jaw flexed. For the first time that night, his lips tightened into the suggestion of a smile, grim, dangerous. "Then let's see if the living can silence them." He advanced. Mina dropped the tray, its warped surface clattering across marble. She had no more mirrors left to spend, but she had herself, and the memory of Jonah's voice, telling her that the world breaks not with noise, but with silence, with a single misstep. She braced. The balance of Mayfair tilted toward its reckoning. The Oriat Finch was no longer a sanctuary. It had become an arena. Tables overturned, linen torn into bandages by desperate hands, crystal shattered into constellations on the floor. Rain still lashed through the broken window, turning the polished wood slick, turning light itself jagged. The wealthy patrons cowered in their corners, mute witnesses to a story they would never tell aloud. and at the heart of it stood Mina Arlow, breathing hard, and Silas Voss, his cloak dripping like the pelt of some dark beast. No more smoke, no more mirrors, only bodies and what they could bear. Silas moved first. Not a charge, not a roar, just a step, precise, like a blacksmith hammering iron. His hand swept for her collarbone, a grip meant to control, to dominate. Mina let him find fabric, let him think he had hold. Then she turned with his momentum, spiraling out, her elbow snapping into the hinge of his arm. A crack sounded. Not break, not yet, but warning. He released with a grunt, recalibrating. The fight was not strength against strength. It was structure against subtraction. Silas struck again, faster, a hook designed to fold ribs. Mina slid low, the fist brushing air above her ear. Her leg scythed across his stance, catching behind his knee. He staggered but did not fall. His hand dropped to seize her shoulder, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked. Pale blue to dark brown, predator to survivor. Mina did not look away. She twisted his wrist outward, dragging the elbow into hyperextension. The sound was wet, sharp, like a cork pulled from bone. Silas hissed, jaw tightening, but his free hand shot forward, colliding with her abdomen. Pain flared white, a reminder that ghosts don't bruise, but the living do. She gasped, vision tilting, but her grip did not loosen. Take one piece at a time, Jonah had told her once, showing her how to dismantle an old radio. Remove the screws, the wires, the casing. Don't fight the machine. Take it apart. She took Silas apart. His elbow compromised, she pivoted to his shoulder, ramming her palm upward to jam the joint. He lurched, trying to counter, but her knee slammed into his shin, destabilizing his frame. His body was a tower, and she had found the fault lines. With a twist, she wrenched his wrist down and across. A sickening pop tore from the joint. His hand hung useless now, a marionette without strings. He snarled, sweat mixing with rain, but still he came. His other arm swung like a hammer. She ducked under, rolled, came up inside his guard. Her fingers speared into the soft notch beneath his jaw. Pressure, not strike. His breath caught, his body betraying him. She shoved upward, driving him back into the edge of an overturned table. Wood groaned. Silas gritted his teeth, refusing collapse. For a moment, they froze. His bulk pressing forward, her slender frame resisting, both suspended in a tableau of fury. Around them, the restaurant held its breath. Elias Kade stood now, half-shadow behind the frosted glass. He watched, unmoving, yet the flicker in his eyes betrayed something he had not felt in years. Awe. Not at the violence, but at the precision. The woman he had dismissed as invisible was remapping the room, rewriting survival. Mina shifted again. Her hand clamped his injured arm, torque spiraling through muscle to bone. She planted her heel against his knee, forcing the joint sideways. Silas collapsed half a step, balance shredded. His body dipped. She locked behind him, her forearm tightening across his throat. The choke was not cruel. It was final. Silas clawed at her grip with his good hand, but the angle was wrong. His breath rasped, his boots slipping on rain-slick floor. He tried to rise, but she drew him tighter, her weight compressed against his spine. His pale eyes flared, then dimmed, rage cooling to reluctant calculation. She could finish it. A second more of pressure, and his storm would end here, on the tiles of Mayfair. But Mina's wrist brushed the red thread. Jonah's knot. A memory that whispered, "Power is for protecting, not for vengeance." Her grip loosened, just enough. Silas dropped forward, collapsing onto hands and knees. His broken arm dangled, his breath ragged. He spat blood onto the tiles, then looked up at her with a grimace that was half defeat, half promise. This isn't over, he rasped. No, Mina said quietly, standing over him, chest heaving. It isn't, but it's no longer yours to control. The rain filled the silence, hammering the broken window, stitching the room together with its endless thread. Elias stepped forward at last, the king of Canary Wharf crossing the battlefield. His gaze flicked once to Silas, then settled fully on Mina. And in that look was something more than gratitude, more than shock. It was recognition, the kind given not to servants but to equals. The room had seen enough. The waitress was gone. The agent remained. The dining room still trembled in silence. Rain carved silver rivulets down the fractured glass, wind stirring the linen of abandoned tables. Patrons remained crouched in their corners, their eyes flickering between Elias Kade, the king who never spoke, and Mina Arlow, the waitress who had torn a room of predators apart. Silas Voss lay against the splintered edge of a table, his good arm propped against wood, his other dangling useless, crooked at the elbow. Blood darkened the collar of his coat, though his eyes, pale, unyielding, had not dimmed. He looked not at Elias, not at the patrons, but at Mina, as if she were the only player left on the board. "You think you've won?" His voice was hoarse, yet carried like gravel across marble. "You've only interrupted the move. The game still belongs to Vale." The name cut through the fog like a bell toll. Mina's breath stuttered. Adrian Vale. To the city, he was a philanthropist, a visionary, a man who poured millions into community programs, who championed access to technology for the forgotten. He was the smiling face at fundraisers, the gentle hand at ribbon cuttings. But to Mina, he was the man who had once lifted her up from the edge of nothing. 17 years old, half-starved, Jonah already coughing blood in a Hackney flat that smelled of mold and fear. Mina had gone to a community tech hub for warmth, not opportunity. And there Vale had been. Tall, elegant, with the eyes of someone who could see promise in wreckage. He had paid for her first set of coding tutorials. He had told her gently that the world did not have to be cruel. And now Silas spoke his name like a curse. Mina's knees felt waterlogged. She steadied herself against the back of a chair, red thread burning against her wrist. "You're lying," she said, but her voice betrayed the fracture. Silas coughed, spit red into a napkin, then laughed softly, a sound without humor. "You think Kade here is the savior? You think his shard is salvation? Elias built a weapon disguised as a valve. Vale knows it. That's why he sent me." Elias stepped forward, calm but sharpened. The storm haloed him in the broken window, his suit shadowed by rain. "Aegis shard is not a weapon," he said, voice low but iron. "It's a break. Without it, the next financial collapse doesn't just burn banks. It burns cities, hospitals, food lines. Vale would turn it into leverage, to redistribute power not with stability, but with fire." Silas's laugh deepened, ragged. "Redistribution is fire. The only way to burn out rot." His gaze slid back to Mina. "Vale hasn't forgotten you, girl. He remembers Hackney. He remembers Jonah. He remembers that thread on your wrist. He told me if I saw you, if you still breathed, I should remind you whose side he fights on. Not the king's. Never the king's." Mina felt the room tilt. Her lungs strained against silence. In her mind, she saw Vale as he once was, kneeling beside her at a flickering terminal, showing her how to trace a line of code, how to press return without fear. His words, "You belong here, not out there, cold and invisible, here, in the future." But she also saw Elias, steady in the storm, speaking of hospitals and food lines with the same calmness he ordered whiskey. His vow to stability, to breaks, not fire. 2 men, 2 visions. One had saved her when she was a girl. One had entrusted her, tonight, as if she were no longer invisible. Her hand touched the thread, the knot Jonah had tied years ago. He had coughed blood into his palm and laughed at her stubbornness. The world will always ask you to choose, Mina. Not between right and wrong, between fires you can stand and fires you can't. She looked at Silas, his breath ragged, his body broken but his conviction intact. She looked at Elias, who had not once raised a hand, who simply stood with the gravity of someone who bore the burden of 10 million silent lives. I don't... Her voice faltered. She swallowed, steadied. I don't fight for either of you. Silas sneered, though his bloodied lips trembled. Then you fight for no one. No, Mina said, straightening, eyes dark with a new resolve. I fight for those who aren't even in this room, the ones neither of you see. Jonah, the nurses, the children who don't know what a stock crash means until the bread disappears. If Vale wants fire, if Kade wants breaks, then I'll be the hand on the lever, not either of you. Silas tried to rise, but his body betrayed him, groaning under damage. He spat blood, defiance his only shield. You'll learn, girl. Vale always gets what he wants. Elias's gaze did not leave Mina. For the first time, his mask of solitude cracked, just slightly, but enough. And yet, he said quietly, tonight you stopped Voss. Tonight you kept the city from bleeding. Not me, not Vale. You. The room shifted with those words. Patrons stared at Mina not as a servant, but as something else, something neither king nor ghost, but perhaps both. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling over London like judgment. Mina closed her eyes for half a breath, letting the sound fill her. She was still a girl from Hackney, still Jonah's sister, still wearing a thread that should have broken years ago. And yet she was also the woman standing between 2 titans, refusing to bend wholly to either. When she opened her eyes, the choice had not simplified. It had only sharpened. And she knew the city would not forgive her for it. The storm had not relented. It drummed against the broken windows, ran in rivers across the floor, slid down crystal shards like 1,000 ticking clocks. Every patron in the Orient Finch knew they had witnessed something unspeakable, yet none dared to move. The city's balance now hung in the hands of a waitress with a red thread tied to her wrist. Mina Arlow stood between Elias Kade and Silas Voss, the former upright and unreadable, the latter broken but still barbed with conviction. Both waited for her to bend. Both assumed she must. But she had learned young. Sometimes the only way to survive was to rewrite the rules. She let silence stretch, drawing all eyes. Then her voice cut clean through the room, calm, measured, undeniable. The shard isn't here. Elias's head snapped toward her, sharp as a blade turning. Silas froze mid-breath. The words fell heavy, heavier than any punch she had thrown. Mina's chest rose once, steadying. It's not in Kade's servers, not in Vale's vaults. It's already with a third hand. Someone outside your wars. Touch a civilian, one innocent, and I release it. To the press, to regulators, to every set of eyes that will burn your secrets into daylight. Gasps fluttered from the corners of the dining room. A hedge fund baron whispered a prayer. A woman in pearls clutched her throat. Elias's pale gaze drilled into Mina, searching for deception. You moved it? His voice was controlled, but something beneath trembled. Surprise, perhaps even awe. Silas snarled, spitting blood. Impossible. She's bluffing. Mina lifted her chin. Try me. You sent men to seal this room, Voss. You thought you'd cornered your prey. But the shard was never prey. It was already beyond your reach. If Vale wants war, let him know the lever he covets is now wired to truth, not fire. Silas staggered, his breath ragged. Vale will never accept. Then carry him my message. Mina's voice hardened. Steel over storm. Tell him it came from Jonah's sister. Tell him the thread still holds. If he remembers Hackney, if he remembers the fire escape where Jonah swore the world could be better, then let him know. I will guard the shard not for him, not for Kade, but for the ones who starve when men like you play empire. Silas's eyes flickered, just once. Recognition. Memory. The name Jonah, spoken aloud, carried weight even in his granite silence. Elias stepped closer, his shoes scattering glass. You understand what you're declaring, he said. Not accusation, warning. Oh, to say you hold the shard outside us both is to invite war from every side. Vale won't stop, and neither will those who fear him. Mina met his gaze. Then let them come. Better they chase me than burn the city down around everyone else. The rain thundered as if agreeing. For a long moment, no one moved. The scene was a painting of tension. Silas, broken but smoldering. Elias, tall and deliberate, hands steady but mind racing. Mina, a small figure lit only by conviction and the faint gleam of her red thread. Finally, Silas's shoulders sagged. He gave a bitter laugh that rattled like gravel. Vale will not forgive this. He will not forgive you. Then let him remember, Mina whispered, that forgiveness was never mine to seek. She stooped, seized the silver feather-shaped sliver Elias had carried, the physical token of the Aegis shard, delicate yet lethal in implication. She held it up, rain-slick, glinting under the fractured chandelier. Then, slowly, she placed it into her own pocket, a gesture neither of theft nor of loyalty, a gesture of custody. Elias exhaled, the faintest break in his composure. He had just entrusted her with what men would kill to possess. And Mina, janitor's daughter, waitress, ghost, had accepted not as servant, but as counterweight. Take him out, she said, nodding at Silas. Her voice carried finality. Alive. With my words. The enforcers, those still conscious, hesitated, then obeyed, dragging their commander toward the storm. Silas's gaze never left Mina. Hatred and respect braided together in his eyes. As he crossed the threshold, he rasped, Vale will hear you, and then you'll see what it means to choose. The door closed. The storm swallowed him. For the first time that night, the room could breathe. Patrons emerged from under tables, trembling, muttering. Staff peeked from the kitchen, their faces pale. The Oriat Finch had been violated. Yet something stranger remained. Awe. Elias turned to Mina. You've just made yourself the fulcrum of London. She brushed wet hair from her face, the red thread clinging like blood against her wrist. Then let's hope the city learns to balance. The rain outside answered in applause, endless, unrelenting. Blue light stuttered against Mayfair stone. Sirens keened like restless choirs as the Metropolitan Police sealed the Oriat Finch with tape and hushed orders. Rain-soaked constables filed past shaken diners, whispering statements into radios, gathering names that would never make tomorrow's papers. Power knew how to bury its wounds. Mina Arlow stood apart, back against the fractured pane where storm still drummed through the broken glass. The red thread clung damp against her wrist, its knot swollen, as if it too had borne the night's battle. Her chest rose in even breaths now, though the tremor in her muscles had not yet faded. The weight of the shard's token, the feather of silver, pressed cold against her pocket. Elias Kade emerged from the shadows of his booth. His suit was creased, his glass untouched, yet his composure had returned, sculpted as carefully as the towers of Canary Wharf. A detective inspector approached, but Elias dismissed him with the ease of a man accustomed to deference. He walked straight to Mina, the storm framing him in streaks of light and rain. "You understand what you've done," he said quietly. Mina met his gaze. "I stopped a massacre. That's all." He shook his head. "No. You declared yourself custodian of the shard. That makes you more dangerous than Vale, more vulnerable than me." His pause was deliberate, and perhaps more necessary. The word necessary lodged between them like a spark waiting for tinder. He extended his hand, not command, not reward, but invitation. "I want you to build something with me. A unit outside the lines. Call it preemption, call it insurance. You'll answer to no committee, no board, only to me. The Gray Division. Operatives who see storms before they fall." Mina looked at his hand. In another life, a girl from Hackney would have taken it without question, because to be chosen was survival. But tonight, after Vale's ghost had walked through Silas's voice, after Jonah's memory had steadied her, she understood something sharper. To accept without condition was to become another cog in another empire. Her fingers brushed the thread at her wrist. Jonah's voice whispered across the years, "Not for revenge, for balance." Her eyes hardened. "One condition." Elias's pale brow arched. "No retaliation against Vale." Her voice was calm, but it cut through the rain like glass. "You want me to build your Gray Division? Then it exists to prevent collapse, not to settle vendettas. Vale's fire will keep burning. I can't stop that. But if we chase him like prey, the city burns faster. No revenge, only balance." Elias studied her for a long moment, as though testing the weight of her demand against the gravity of markets. At last, his jaw set. "Agreed." He extended his hand again. This time, Mina took it. Not as servant to master, not as subordinate to king, but as counterweight. Their grip was firm, measured, an axis forged in stormlight. The inspector returned, notebook damp, voice hesitant. "Mr. Kade, we'll need a statement." Elias did not look away from Mina. "Later." The inspector swallowed his objection and withdrew. That was the gravity of power. Even law bent under its orbit. Mina exhaled, her gaze drifting to the storm beyond the Thames. The lights of Canary Wharf shimmered across the black water, steel towers gleaming like a crown. Somewhere in those towers waited servers and vaults and secrets. Somewhere else, across darker boroughs, Adrian Vale planned his next move. Between them, the city stretched wide and fragile, stitched by invisible threads. She touched the knot Jonah had tied long ago on a fire escape, where the world had felt smaller but no less cruel. Tonight, the knot had not broken. It had tightened. Elias spoke softly, almost as if to himself. "The city thinks power lives in its towers. They're wrong. Tonight, it was decided in a restaurant, by a girl with a red thread." Mina did not correct him. She only looked out across the storm-lit Thames, her breath steady, her resolve carved by memory. She knew this was no ending, only the first ripple. Above the river, gray clouds churned, restless, unresolved. The Gray Division had been born, and with it, the promise, not of obedience, not of vengeance, but of balance. And so, dear listener, On a storm-drenched night in London, a waitress stepped out of invisibility and rewrote the balance of power. But stories like this are not only about kings and agents. They are about us, about the threads we carry, the knots tied by those we've lost, and the choices we make when silence demands a voice. If this story moved you, if it made you think of the storms you've faced and the threads you still hold, please subscribe, share it with someone who needs hope tonight, and let us know in the comments, what would you protect if it were in your hands? Because every story is a shard, and every shard can change the world.